It is always said that it is difficult to change history, right? But if you think about it for a moment, it is not really the case. If, for example, your father arrived late for his first date with your mother, even by just a few minutes, you probably wouldn't be born at all. It is weird to think about it, but sometimes history changes in a second, even the history of a nation. On November 4th, 1995, a Saturday evening at 9:42 p.m, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin walked down the steps next to us, heading for the armoured car that waited for him just a few steps away. Any little thing that would happen differently, one look from one of the dozens of people that were here, one look that would have noticed the murderer hiding behind them, and this place would once again be just a stairway at the foot of Tel Aviv City Hall. The smallest change in history, and all of us would be living now in an entirely different country. But that little something did not happen, and so we are here today, in the place where the state of Israel changed forever. Many years have passed since then, but for every person who was alive then, they will not forget the moment when they heard the news. The Prime Minister of Israel has been murdered. You need to understand, this combination of words was simply unimaginable. Nobody thought that this could happen, and if so, the murderer would certainly have been a terrorist. But the Prime Minister was murdered by an Israeli assassin, a Jew, right here, where we are now standing. Let's go back 1 hour. Imagine that the vast square across the road is full of tens of thousands of people. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is standing on stage with tears in his eyes. He could not believe that so many people, the vast majority of whom were young people and teenagers, came together that evening to support him. Rabin, who was born to be a leader, who was a commander in the War of Independence, who was the IDF Chief of Staff that liberated Jerusalem during the Six-Day War, who was the Defense Minister, the Ambassador to Washington, the first Israeli-born Prime Minister. Rabin, who had truly seen everything in his life, nearly cried with emotion. Because this rally followed some of the most difficult months of his life. 2 years earlier, Rabin took one of the most brave and controversial steps that any Israeli Prime Minister had ever taken, and signed a peace agreement with the Palestine Liberation Organization. The PLO represented the Palestinian people, but was also a terrorist organization responsible for the deaths of many Israelis. The Palestinians would receive an independent state, would recognize Israel, and live alongside it in peace. Rabin believed this was the only way to end this 100-year conflict. He knew this step would come with a price, but was convinced that it was worth paying the price of peace to prevent another 100 years of war. Rabin also managed to sign an historic peace agreement with King Hussein of Jordan and even received the Nobel Peace Prize. But slowly, things went wrong. A terrible wave of terror attacks flooded the country. Many dozens of Israelis were killed in murderous suicide bombings all over Israel. 2 years after signing the Oslo Accords, Rabin found himself alone, facing a huge wave of protest and incitement. Many on the right saw him as a traitor. In their eyes, the agreement that Rabin signed was a disaster. Opposition parties arranged protests against the Prime Minister again and again. It sounds familiar, right? Except that the most common cries were not only that Rabin is corrupt or Rabin should resign. In many cases, people chanted, "Rabin is a murderer." Some of the demonstrators even built a coffin meant for him. The terrible message was clear, but right-wing leaders did not do enough to restrain this violence. It is unlikely that even they could guess what might happen. And then, amid these difficult times, a suggestion was made to hold a counter-rally. A solidarity protest by all the pro-peace organizations on the 4th of November in the square next to us, which was then called Kings of Israel Square. Some warned that it was too dangerous, that something bad might happen. Rabin was not willing to listen. He even refused to wear a protective vest. As we mentioned, nobody was capable of imagining the murder of a Prime Minister, not even the Prime Minister himself. One person who did imagine it was a young law student from Herzliya. He reached the conclusion that the only way to stop the peace process was to eliminate the Prime Minister. As an observant Jew, he convinced himself that according to Jewish law, he had divine justification to carry out his plot. At 8:15 p.m, when the rally was already in full flow, Yigal Amir stepped off bus route 247 and made his way toward the square. 9 p.m, as Rabin stands on the stage and makes his speech, the murderer is already here on this sidewalk next to us, walking freely between the many police officers that are rushing around. Not one of them bothers to check who he is or what he is doing. Violence erodes the foundations of democracy, reads an emotional Rabin from the podium, standing opposite thousands of balloons and banners, unaware that this is the final speech he will ever make, unaware that the violence he is speaking about is already lurking at the bottom of the stairs. 9:30 p.m. The rally ends with a huge rendition of a song for peace. Rabin unusually joins in with his deep voice, holding a sheet with the lyrics of the song. Here, security forces are preparing for the end of the rally. The armoured Cadillac is already parked on the sidewalk, waiting for the Prime Minister. The murderer is watching the events unfold from his hiding place, touching the gun in his coat pocket. He knows that his target will walk by right next to him in a matter of minutes. 9:37 p.m. The song ends with applause and the huge crowd starts to disperse. Meanwhile, Rabin lingers on stage, thanking the organisers of the event and smiling at Shimon Peres, his partner in the vision of peace. Those who stood alongside him on the stage balcony recall that Rabin looked happier than he had seemed for a long time. 9:41 p.m. The sidewalk is heaving with politicians, artists, police, passers-by. Rabin bids farewell, and the entourage starts to descend the stairs. The Prime Minister is always surrounded by 3 bodyguards. From within the masses, they try to survey the scene. All the action is happening on this side, where thousands of demonstrators are filling the main street. None of the security guards look the other way. Rabin and his guards finish descending the stairs and walk quickly toward the vehicle, where the back door is already open. A few more steps, and the chaos is over. 9:42 p.m. 3 handgun bullets are fired at the Prime Minister's back from point-blank range. He collapses. Within seconds, the guards carry him to the vehicle and speed toward Ichilov Hospital, several hundred meters from here. Attempts to resuscitate him last 40 minutes. An entire country is in shock. Thousands of protesters remain in the square, lighting candles and praying. But at 11:14 p.m. the news arrives. Rabin is dead. We didn't know what to do with the pain, with the anger. For a week we didn't leave the square. We sang Shir LaShalom, a song for peace. We lit remembrance candles. We cried for the leader that we loved, and we cried for what we knew would never return. Now, we would have liked to say, Rabin is dead, but his legacy lives on. But that wouldn't be entirely true. 6 months after his death, the right won the elections. One of the leaders of the right who participated in the protests against Rabin became the new Prime Minister. The peace process continued to flutter for several more years until it perished. The vision of Rabin is now the vision of a minority of Israelis. That peace between us and our closest neighbours that Rabin died for sometimes appears like a childish dream that many tend to dismiss. And the violence that Rabin spoke about, I think you'll agree with me that it did not go anywhere. And so we stand here today. This place will forever remind us of how fragile history is and how easy it is to hurt democracy. This place will forever remind us how far violence can go if not restrained in time. This place will always remind us, all of us, no matter our political views, of our obligation to do everything in our power to make sure that no memorial like this will ever be built again.